The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL.
The rematch, we talk about how both teams have changed since this first meeting and a lot more.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It has been wild times for both of these teams since they last played. The Steelers have gone 2-2 in the 4-game stretch. The Ravens 2-1 with a bye. Both teams are in the heat of the AFC North race. The Steelers have a game up on the Ravens after they lost last week. The Ravens beat the Giants, and now these two teams are meeting in this game. If the Steelers win, they clinch the AFC North. The race is over, and then it's about wild card teams and seeding for the Steelers. If the Ravens win, it still will come down to the last two games of the season, where if the Steelers win out, they would still win the division because of tiebreakers. But of course, that becomes a bigger question with the Chiefs coming to town on Christmas, the Ravens going to play the Texans, lots of stuff there. But one thing that's been noticeable on tape, one thing that's been noticeable to everyone, the Ravens' pass defense has gotten better than when it was. And it kind of started with their performance in the Steelers game. And the Steelers acknowledged that a lot when we talked to them in the Steelers locker room on Wednesday. What has been the impetus of that change, Kevin?
Yeah, Chris, there's a lot that goes into it. I think the big thing is after the Ravens beat the Bengals on Thursday Night Football the week before they played the Steelers, it's now come out that there was a very fiery closed door / open forum meeting between the defense and the coaching staff, players. And it was very much so hey, let's get all our issues out. Let's air everything out. And how can we get better? And so it wasn't like finger pointing and like, oh, you're doing this wrong. Like, you're terrible. Like, you get out of here. It was more so, hey, if you want to play, and Marlon Humphrey ended up saying this was kind of the message of the meeting. If you want to play, you want to win, you want to put in the work, you're going to have a spot on that field. If you don't, you're going to be on the bench. And that's exactly what's happened here, where Marcus Williams, their $70 million man, has not played for them. And it's been a while since he's been on the field for them. Eddie Jackson, who actually didn't make the trip to Pittsburgh due to personal reasons, and that ended up being he was unhappy with his role. The Ravens said, you're not playing well anyway. See you later. You're now off the team. But the big thing to me is they've moved Kyle Hamilton back to more of a traditional safety role. They've played him more. It's instead of putting them all around, putting them up at the line, middle of the defense, they've now moved him back. And it's now him and Ardarius Washington is the two safeties for the team. And that, I think, has calmed everything down on all three levels. It is, I guess, redefined certain roles, but in a good way. And I think the defense is playing more free with that, where you're not relying on another guy to do what Kyle Hamilton's doing right now. Hamilton can play anywhere. You can put him anywhere. He's that good. But to me, especially, you're right, the game against Pittsburgh really started this upward trajectory for them. It's been just about building confidence, too. And partially the Ravens playing well, sometimes teams gifting the Ravens turnovers, like that Russell Wilson throw in the Pittsburgh game in the end zone. I know he was trying to darn Washington was supposed to go up for that ball, but it just landed in the hands of Marlon Humphrey. And like, hey, that's a momentum play for you. That's great. So it's been a very, very good thing, because a lot of people in Baltimore, Chris, were wondering. It's like, well, the passing offense is great in Baltimore. The rushing offense is great. The rushing defense is great. Well, it's just that pass defense. If they can figure that out, they can be a very dangerous football team. And although you mentioned they're 2-1 before the bye and everything, I still think that this Baltimore Ravens team has done a tremendous job turning that secondary around.
I mean, it certainly has been. You look at the lack of explosive plays that they've allowed since that Steelers game, and even in that Steelers game, it speaks volumes to what they're doing there, and they're trying to play to their strengths, and that's sometimes what you need to do. You know, Kyle Hamilton's a big part of this team's future, and letting him play to his strength, that seems like it makes a lot of sense. Moving Marlon Humphrey, inside a little bit more, that allows him to kind of get physical and make more plays like he did in that Steelers game. So. I get the sense there that's a big part of this too. And the Steelers are trying to make their own changes. Now, granted, they're coming off a tough loss to the Eagles, but I do think that Russell Wilson started to find himself a little bit more in this offense after the Ravens game. They had a tough week against Cleveland in the snow, short week on the road. Blizzard hits mid game. It kind of changes things. But after that, they light up the scoreboard against the Bengals for 44 points. They outscore the Browns, and they kind of hold back at the end, just trying to run out the clock, 27 points there. But in both of those contests, Russell Wilson against the Bengals hits 10 different guys with passes. Against the Browns, 9 different guys. Now, against the Eagles, that changed up a little bit, and part of it, I think, is because the Eagles are just a really good defense, and George Pickens wasn't in the game, and so that kind of limited what they were doing. But I think that's where this game is going to come down to is how much improved is the Ravens defense against a quarterback like Russell Wilson, because in the stretch since then they played Justin Herbert, good quarterback, good passing attack. They came out on top. They played the Eagles like the Steelers, didn't win that one, and then they beat up on the Giants. So Russell Wilson, interesting challenge for that, especially with the way that he attacked this Ravens defense. Is this a defense that can afford to, do 2 deep looks and protect against the deep ball while also defending the Steelers' run? I think that could be a big part of this game if they're able to pull that off, take away the deep ball while also taking away the run game.
Yeah, it's going to be a huge part for Baltimore, at least, being able to stop any explosive plays the Steelers offense might be able to make. And I know we're going to get into the availability of some of these guys a little bit later on in the show, but on the defensive side of the ball for Baltimore, it's going to be massive. Plus with Pittsburgh, we know that, especially in that Eagles game, Pittsburgh, they didn't play their best football, but they were still in the game with some time left. And I know that people were kind of wondering, is Pittsburgh going to win the game? Who knows? But in my opinion, I think that when these two teams match up, Baltimore and Pittsburgh, and we've been talking for years, Chris, we know this. This is going to be one of those like slobber knocker games that's going to come down to the wire, and you can throw everything out the window. Doesn't matter how good each team is. It's just going to be one of those games. But it feels like there is a different mood, at least in Baltimore this week. Obviously, Ravens-Steelers week has rivalry. It's rivalry week. It's Steelers week, Ravens week. But we can be honest about this, Chris. I'll be honest about this. This really hasn't been a rivalry over the last handful of seasons because Baltimore's lost 8 of their last 9 games to the Steelers, and the Ravens are mad about that. The Ravens want to rid that trend. And Roquan Smith, I think, put it best for both teams here. This is a check your manhood game because everything is on the line here. AFC North crown, and from a Baltimore perspective, you cannot let a division rival, especially your most heated rival in the Pittsburgh Steelers, celebrate a division title on your home field. So they're going to do everything in their power to try to stop this. I think it's going to be a very intense, very physical game, and a lot of that, I think, too, is going to come down to which team is able to execute at a higher level, which, again, we're going to talk about a little bit later on in the show. But this Steelers team, they've had Lamar Jackson's number. Obviously, the defense has done their job on him over the course of Lamar's career. And actually, fun or maybe not so fun fact, depending on how you look at it, is Lamar has only played in 1 game against the Steelers at home as a starter, and that was in 2020, back when they only allowed 4,000 fans in the stadium because that was obviously the pandemic and going through all that. And Lamar has also never played both games in a season against Pittsburgh. So a lot of new milestones happening for a 7-year veteran quarterback in Lamar Jackson. I'm excited to see how it pans out.
Certainly I am too, because Lamar Jackson's a guy I've always had a high reverence for. Even when he was coming out of Louisville in the draft, I thought he was fantastic, and I thought the Steelers should be considering him at the time. And here he is playing really well for the Ravens, and the Steelers have just been that one team that he just hasn't figured out how to get over the hump. His only win is the game against Devlin Hodges and Mason Rudolph back in 2019 when he started against them there. And yes. Since then, he's only played, 4 other times? We talked about how Lamar's missed so many big games in this rivalry. The Steelers are hoping to not miss their best player, and that's TJ Watt. He got injured late against the Eagles. I do think the Steelers got a big break in what it was. It looked like a non-contact ankle or Achilles injury initially. It turned out it was a lower ankle injury instead of a high ankle injury, which was a blessing. And I can tell you, Kevin, right now the Steelers, Mike Tomlin seems very confident about TJ Watt's ability to play this week when we talked to him at the top of the week on Monday, and then The Steelers, they've been working him in. We've seen videos from practice where he's been able to be part of the practices. The Steelers are certainly limiting him, but I think that TJ Watt, he's not a first or second or third year player who needs to go through reps. They're going to rest him until game day. I do think that TJ Watt will play in this game unless there's some unforeseen setback. However, the big question is still George Pickens, who has not officially practiced this week. We've seen videos of him doing drills at practice, showing that he's still fast, still explosive, but hamstring injuries are tricky. And I think those two being available, that's your best playmaker on offense for Russell Wilson. That's your best playmaker on the entire team. And, maybe the defensive player of the year, people are talking about, he's still in that conversation. On the other side of the ball, that's two big factors that both teams have to watch, including also Deshaun Elliott, who's been a really good safety for the Steelers this year. And the Ravens know he used to be over there.
Yeah. And if TJ Watt is unable to play, obviously that's a huge loss. Again, from what you said, Chris, seems like he might be able to go in this one, but I am really looking at the George Pickens situation, especially because when you talk about with what this Ravens team has, there's a lot of, sorry about the siren.
It's okay.
My bad on that. But that's for me, at least, with this Ravens team and the way this pass defense has played, there's a lot of different situations of, well, if George Pickens plays, that's the guy you have to stop. If George Pickens doesn't play, well, who do you stop? Is it Van Jefferson? Is it Calvin Austin? Who is it going to be? Pat Frymuth's obviously an option in the passing game. You cannot discredit what he can do. But wide receiver wise, I already kind of favor Baltimore secondary, even with Pickens in there. You just have to kind of slow him down. But if Pickens is out, there's going to be so many other things that can go on. So for me, I think that if Pickens doesn't play, that's a huge loss for Pittsburgh. And we kind of saw last week that Steelers passing offense fizzle out without him, because I think he means so much, especially with the lack of depth that they have at that position.
No, I mean, one thing that Pickens gives you right away is the ability to throw deep and for him to go win those one-on-one balls. Russell Wilson likes to throw those. And now Russell Wilson's also shown he will do that to anybody. He completed one of those to Scotty Miller a couple of weeks ago, several yards downfield. Mike Williams has gotten some of those, but having George Pickens forces defenses to honor him. And if they don't, immediately, one-on-one, we're going that way. And if they do, well, know that there's two defenders someplace, and Russell Wilson's a smart quarterback. He quickly picks at that and he will go another way. So injuries playing a big role in this one, but so will, I think, two key battles that these two teams are facing each other, and that involves turnovers and third downs. Now, last week, the Steelers gave up 10 third down conversions out of 17 attempts on the Eagles. That was the most third down conversions allowed in a single game by the Steelers defense all season. They dropped from being the second best third down defense to being the seventh best in a single week with their percentage points. Meanwhile, the Ravens' third down offense, second best in the league right now. They have been really clutch. The only team with a better third down percentage than them is the Kansas City Chiefs. To me, that's going to be a big part of this. Is can the Steelers get back to playing really well on third downs? Can they win that? In the previous matchup, the Steelers defense kind of won out on third downs, 4 out of 11 for the Ravens. Granted, the Steelers offense didn't do too well either, 4 out of 16, but I feel like that point's been big, but also the turnover aspect. You talked about, we've talked about how Marlon Humphrey played a big role with that interception he had in the end zone. The Steelers responded with their own interception right after that. The Steelers are a plus 18, leading the NFL, tied with the Bills in their turnover differential. The Ravens are only a plus 2, and I think that those two things, third downs and turnovers, both teams are scheming up how to get the best advantages in those moments right now.
Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
maybe a little bit of a playoff preview as well.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
One of the things you talk about, Danielle Hunter, and you talk about Will Anderson, and I think that's a great place to start when you start talking about matchups in this game, because you're looking at a situation, and I'm guessing based on what happened last week and the fact that Humphries hasn't played, that they're going to be going up against Joe Thuney, who is a left guard, not a tackle, and Juwan Taylor. Juwan Taylor's been okay. He's been better this season than he was last year. Not what you would want probably as your starting right tackle for the money that you're paying him. But Joe Thuney is a phenomenal left guard, but he's not going to be playing there. And now you're in a situation where you're going to have him go up against a guy that's leading the NFL in sacks and pressures, and that's going to be a tough assignment for him. And I do think that one of the things Kansas City needs to focus on this week is trying to maybe run directly at him early on, and not saying that he can't stop it to some extent, but run directly at him and then try to come back and do the quick passing game and try to get the ball out quickly and wear him out that way, because I don't think you want to be taking deep shots on it with a guy that can't really roll out. We'll see what Mahomes looks like, but this is going to be something that's concerning going into this game for me.
Yeah, one of the things that's concerning, one of the biggest concerns for me, and we've spoken about the Houston Texans offense and some of their, inefficiencies this season. And I mean, anytime you have Chris Jones, no matter where he lines up, D'Amico had a lot to say. Head coach of the Houston Texans, D'Amico Ryans, had a lot to say about Chris Jones and the way that he can move up and down the line. He said you can play him on the inside. You might see him playing on the outside, and him giving, every offensive lineman that he goes up against fits. And I had a chance on Wednesday to speak with left tackle Laramie Tunsil, and he said it's going to be a good matchup for Titus Howard, who has moved from the right tackle position to the left guard to help shore up some of that line. And that's going to be a tough matchup for him, especially for somebody who, this is the first game. I mean, this will be the second game he's played at that position in a very long time. And going up against Chris Jones and, the way they slide him, like I said, up and down that line, it's going to be tough on CJ to be able to recognize where Chris Jones is at all times, because that's going to be the key. Also, the Kansas City Chiefs have a very, very good run defense, and you have to make sure that if the Texans want to be effective, if they want to be effective against Kansas City, I think that they're going to have to get Joe Mixon going in that running game and get him going early and often as they can, so he can open up maybe some passing lanes for CJ to throw the ball to Nico Collins. Maybe we can get Tank Dell involved a little bit more this week. Maybe you can see a little bit more of Dalton Schultz, and even using Joe Mixon out of the backfield as a pass option. And so that is one of the biggest concerns that I have when I'm looking at the Kansas City team and saying, here is a team that starts and stops. As much as I've talked about the Houston Texans defensive line, I mean, the Kansas City Chiefs have a very good defensive line as well, led by Chris Jones. And so, that's going to be interesting. And real quickly, I want to see how on the defensive side of the ball, how rookies Kalen Bullock from the safety position and Kamari Lassiter will match up against, even if Patrick Mahomes is injured. I mean, his arm isn't, his mind isn't.
True.
And he can manipulate you. He can navigate anything. If he gets to an open spot, he'll make you think that he's throwing right, all the while he's looking at, left, which could be former Houston Texans DeAndre Hopkins, who is still a very reliable wide receiver and very good possession receiver, or Travis Kelce, still being effective as he is, finding spots in a zone to be able to sit down. And so I'm eager to see how D'Amico matches with his former coach in Andy Reid when D'Amico was there in Philadelphia for 1 year with Andy in I think it was 2012. So it's going to be a matchup of the minds. And I don't think that, here's the funny thing real quick, Chris. I don't think that each team is going to go out and give too much because they could potentially be playing again in a couple of weeks.
No, and that's a great point, and I do think that actually plays into this, and I think that actually plays into how Kansas City looks at all these 3 games as well, because you're right. They could be playing all 3 of these teams in the next month and a half again, and that wouldn't be the best scenario for Kansas City in any way, shape, or form. So, you talk about the rookie safeties. What that brings my mind to is I'm sitting here kind of getting a little bit giddy, if I'm being honest, because to me, that's a Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown on a deep route somewhere. You got 2 of the fastest guys in the NFL that are going to be on this roster, and I think Hollywood does play this week. I don't know how much he'll play, but I do think he's been full in practice both times, so I do think that they're going to have him out there, especially considering that it's a short week against the Steelers the next week. So I think that's going to be intriguing to see how that works out. Really the last thing for me is, and you kind of mentioned this, the Chiefs' run defense has been fantastic this season. I'm not going to say that they've been shut down and they're keeping running backs under 50 yards a game. That's not what I'm trying to say. But when you can keep running teams to 60, 70 yards, usually most games you're going to be good. It's when you get in a scenario where they're running and gashing you for 5 or 6 yards a carry and they get up to 95, 100, 120 yards, because that wears your defense out. 50, 60 yards you can deal with. And if they can stop the running game, that makes it a lot harder for CJ to be able to hit in the passing game.
Yeah. And you have going up against one of the toughest things in trying to stop Joe Mixon is he's very good on the cutbacks. He's very good going one way and can switch and change directions. And, you think that you have him stop going right for a 2-yard loss, and then he cuts back to the left and picks up 20 yards.
Got to be very defensively sound.
Yes, for sure.
So, all right. I know we're not going to give score predictions, but how do you see this one shaking out?
I actually believe that the Houston Texans will get themselves together offensively and pull out the win, especially going up against a hobbled Patrick Mahomes. Now, Patrick was fully healthy. My prediction would be a little bit different because Kansas City is so good, but I do believe that with the defense that the Houston Texans have, and getting CJ, that we've seen glimpses of CJ against Miami, having some of that old CJ magic. I think that the Texans will go up there and pull out a win.
Well, I'm not going to give a score either right now. You'll get that from me on the preview show tomorrow. But I will say I think that Kansas City finds a way to win this game. I do think that Andy Reid has looked at the schedule and he's figured out exactly how he wants to attack them the last 3 weeks of the season. And this plays into that. And the only reason that you're going to have Mahomes out there and playing is because you think that you need him to go out and win this game, because you are looking at the last 2 games going, I don't want to have to win both those games to get the number 1 seed. Because the reality is you're in a situation where you haven't had a bye week since week 6. You could almost find a way to get 2 bye weeks if you can win this game, because you can rest some players against the Steelers, and then they have to go win against the Broncos and get another week of rest as the number 1 seed. So we'll see what happens.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. And you can take a look maybe at some Thursday night football. The Chargers actually slight favorites tonight over the Broncos in LA. FanDuel has the Chargers laying 2.5. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Philadelphia Eagles are looking forward to clinching their second NFC East Division title in 3 years, and the Washington Commanders are looking forward to making them do it next week against the Dallas Cowboys.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on with the Philadelphia Eagles? Because understand, city of brotherly love, AJ and Jalen are feeling it. What's going on with Philly?
It is crazy how different 1 week in the NFL can make, where at this time last week, we're putting out fires. Jalen Hurts apparently hates A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown hates Jalen Hurts. Brandon Graham hates everything that's going on. It's going on Eagles radio to just light this thing on fire with gasoline. And then they have the passing performance they did against Pittsburgh, and all is well. Suddenly they're seen as the best team in football, according to a lot of national media outlets, fans, and, pretty much everybody alike. They have a chance to get the 1 seed, tied at 12-2 with Detroit, riding a 10-game win streak. They've never done that in franchise history. So I think a lot of what happened last week was definitely overblown. It was certainly a problem. Their passing inconsistencies was an issue that was ignited by public comment. But I think after that performance against the Steelers, against an elite defense, the vibes are pretty high right now in Philadelphia. And this is a big game to not only clinch the division, but like I said, they got to try to catch Detroit and Minnesota here and secure that home field advantage.
Yeah, man. Look, I don't know if I would get on board with the Eagles being the best team in the NFL. I think the Buffalo Bills probably have the biggest stake to that claim right now.
Hard to argue.
In the NFC, man. I mean, look what the Lions are going through. Like David Montgomery is on his third. He's on his third opinion, trying to save. That's when you know it's season. Over.
When you're asking a third doctor, that's when you know your stuff's messed up.
I mean, look, I applaud him for trying. That's the heart of the warrior right there. I applaud him for trying. But what they're going through, the Minnesota Vikings, is Sam Darnold real, not real? I think the Eagles certainly have a stake to claim to being the best team in the NFC. Obviously, the best team in the NFC East, because whether it comes against Washington, Dallas, or the New York Giants, I mean, the Eagles need one win to clinch. They're going to get that win, right? I mean, we're trying to delay the inevitable here in Landover, Maryland this weekend is what we're trying to do. But the question here is, are we to the point now? And like you said, the difference a week makes, because I've been on a lot of shows and I've said, as weird as it kind of sounds, the key to beating the Philadelphia Eagles is to make Jalen Hurts be the savior of the game, because if Saquon needs to be the savior, we know Saquon can be the savior. Is it fair to say that now the Eagles are finding a balance to where if Jalen needs to save the game, he can?
Yeah, I think so. And I think over the last 2 years, he's shown he can do that. Is he ever going to be the consistent pocket passer inside a structure, the processor of a Pat Mahomes, a Joe Burrow, even to a degree, like, of course, Josh Allen right now or Lamar Jackson? Probably not. He's an RPO quarterback that goes off field, very rhythm and momentum based. Like, he's going to rely on explosive plays outside of structure with his mobility, throwing the deep ball. But you weren't even really getting that, David, like, throughout this 10-game win streak. That was the problem. Was I'm not asking for 2022 MVP finalist Jalen Hurts that we saw in Super Bowl 57, but you weren't even getting the Jalen Hurts of early last year, who was inconsistent, but you still got a lot of great moments. What he showed against the Steelers showed us that he still does have that greatness in him at times against really good defenses and big moments. Like, that's a game you got to have. So I think the confidence is instilled now in this football team that if they have to do that, they can. Are they suddenly going to change their identity and start throwing the ball 30 plus times again? No. Saquon Barkley is still the Batman of this offense, but I do think Jalen Hurts showed on Sunday he can be Robin. And if he's got to be Batman at times, especially in the biggest spots, i.e. January in the postseason coming up, he can still be that player.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of Jalen Hurts, man. I remember before that Super Bowl run, the season that Super Bowl run happened, and I went on an Eagles podcast. I can't remember the name of it now, to be honest with you. I apologize. It's been a while. And I praised Jalen Hurts to the point where that host actually said, hold on, let me ask you something. If the Philadelphia Eagles called right now and said, give us a first-round pick or, say, a third and a future third for Jalen Hurts, would you take that deal? And I, without hesitation, said, yes, I would take that deal. And he said, well, I hope that you become the GM, because I would love to take that deal too. And then the end of that season, Jalen Hurts is in the Super Bowl for the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm feeling vindicated. And then now this season, and towards the end of last season, the collapse and all that stuff, I'm kind of like, oh, like maybe this is where that guy was kind of talking about. So to see him kind of rise back up a little bit, certainly, from someone who loves the way that Jalen Hurts plays the game, I'm enjoying it. Of course, looking forward to hopefully the Commanders being able to stifle him on defense. That overblown storyline of A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts hate each other. Not started, but certainly doused with gasoline by Brandon Graham, defensive lineman, teammate. And certainly, he tried to backpedal it, but you know how this goes, man. As soon as it's out there, it's out there.
Oh, yeah. And
this Eagles defense. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, too, like, I want to give Jalen some credit. I don't think a lot of the passing, quote unquote, issues of the last 9 games were always issues. Like, there were games they were inconsistent, but I also think he embraced being a pocket passer, or I should say a game manager that knew they were going to run the football to win games. So he took over a more cautious approach and wasn't being as aggressive and kind of took a back seat. So I think that was also a calculated decision from Jalen to, not always force things and be aggressive. So overall, I think he knew he had to turn it up this Sunday to prove everybody wrong. And I think that was really good to see.
And there's something to having a quarterback who doesn't require the spotlight too.
Sure.
Right? Like
it's a great
point. It can be frustrating while he finds kind of the happy medium and really finds the groove and all that stuff. I get that. But having a guy that doesn't need the spotlight, I think is really huge for a team that's got a lot of talent and a lot of spotlight to share with other people. But defensively, Louis, we're going to talk about the defense that the Philadelphia Eagles brought up against the Commanders last time. Again, because it was incredibly impressive. I'm still flabbergasted every time I talk about it. But overall, Philadelphia Eagles defense, how's that unit looking? How has Vic Fangio got that group going?
I can't believe that they're number one in so many categories on defense. Like, they've been the best defense in football over the last 2 months. And I mean, they're the youngest team in football on defense. That's the most incredible part about it. I was excited heading into the season. I didn't think they would be this far along. I mean, Quinyon Mitchell doesn't just look like a rookie of the year favorite, but also a first team all-pro candidate. And, Cooper DeJean already looks like one of the best slot corners in football. Their defensive line, Jalen Carter, is a game wrecker that teams have to double every play, and it's opening things up for Nolan Smith and Josh Sweat. Milton Williams is having a breakout year. Philadelphia never has good linebackers. They've got 2 of them right now in Nakobe Dean and Zach Bond. So, the defense overall, Vic Fangio, there's been years where the Eagles defense is really great because of coaching, and there's been years where it's really great because of personnel. This year, it's finally this perfect marriage of the coach understanding the personnel and the personnel just being in the perfect position to succeed. So they have really dominated, and they're not winning in spite of any position on that side of the ball right now.
Yeah, and look, I know Howie Roseman does not get near the credit that he should. Of course, I'm joking because Howie Roseman gets all the credit in the world. But the fact that Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean are doing what they're doing. I mean, outside of cornerback, arguably the hardest position to transition from college football to the NFL.
I totally agree.
And they got two. Who are like, what do you mean it's hard?
Yeah,
we're just doing this thing.
And David, that's the one thing Howie was just never good at, was finding young cornerback talent. If you look at when they won the Super Bowl in 2017, they won in spite of corner. 2022, it was veteran corners. He finally invested in corners in the draft early. And like you said, he got not just one stud, but 2. It really is unbelievable. I've been screaming on this podcast from the mountaintops over the last few years for him to do this. And finally he did, and it's working out.